Hey folks, welcome back to Longevity with Natalie Nidham. I'm Natalie Nidham. I'm your host, and I am so excited that you are here with me today. We have a fantastic conversation with an absolutely fabulous guest, as always. Now, before we jump in, we of course are going to want to thank a couple of our sponsors because, well, number one, the only sponsors we allow on this show are people who are doing amazing things, amazing brands that actually might just be the thing to help to shift the needle for you. But also before that, I want to thank you, the people who are responsible for this podcast surpassing 3.5 million downloads to date and growing with every single day. Thanks to you guys, I get to do what I love. I get to share information with you and other people about the people who are really changing the landscape of what it takes to be healthy, vital, and live our best life together. Now, if you want to hang out with me at all, I would like to invite you to think about joining my community. And to do that, all you have to do is go to the website, natnidham.com. You will actually have the opportunity to think about joining the community if that's something that you think you would benefit from and would like to do. And also, you can think about actually signing up for my newsletter. Now, the cool thing about the newsletter, a couple of things to say. Number one, if you sign up for the big newsletter, you will get an 8-part series email that goes really into quite a lot of depth about how we like to approach preparing the body for more advanced biohacking techniques, such as using bioregulator peptides. The second option, and you can choose both actually, you don't have to pick one or the other, you can pick both. But the second option really is a newsletter that's more devoted to this whole area of peptides. So if you're into peptides or you want to get into peptides, you might want to sign up for that one. Or you might want to just sign up for the big one, or you might want to sign up for both. With good reason, we talk a lot about gut health. But what if the conversation has been missing a critical piece? Dr. William Davis, cardiologist, New York Times bestselling author of Wheat Belly and now Supergut, and chief medical officer at Realize Therapeutics, argues that our modern microbiome isn't just unbalanced, it's actually fundamentally depleted. His recent clinical trials reveal that restoring lost bacterial strains doesn't just improve digestion. It actually plays a key role in fat loss while preserving muscle mass, preventing weight gain, and even enhancing, listen to this, skin and metabolic health. So today we're getting into the real science, how these microbes regulate insulin, inflammation, and even neurological function. If you're optimizing for longevity and body composition, this is a conversation you do not want to miss. Dr. William Davis is a wonderful, gracious guest. He has also extended a beautiful discount to the listeners of this podcast if you decide to try out some of his innovative formulas that actually help to replenish some of those keystone species that we talk about in the episode. Now, there's not a link that I can read to you guys. There is a link in the show notes on getting your 10% discount off those products. And of course, if you want to learn more about Dr. William Davis and his work, definitely get your hands on his Supergut book and or Wheat Belly if you happen to miss that one a few years ago. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Dr. William Davis, it is such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for making time to record this episode.
Thank you, Natalie. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So look, like so many, I don't think anybody can be in this space without being aware of your incredible body of work. What I didn't know necessarily, and maybe because I didn't pay enough attention or I forgot when I first read Wheat Belly, is that you're a cardiologist by training. That's kind of where you started your journey, yes?
Yes, admittedly, doing rotten things to people that they didn't need. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So at what point did you figure that out? Because your first book was about people interpreting their heart scans, right? And then how much time between that and Wheat Belly? I'm just curious, actually. You know what, guys? This has nothing to do with the episode. I'm just curious because I'm fascinated with this journey that you've been on that has taken you to a whole different universe than where you started.
Natalie, I wish I could tell you it was an act of brilliance and insight and good looks and charm. No, it was a series of blunders, mistakes, zigzagging, doing things that were wrong, doing things that were right. But I think it led me down paths that I never would have followed had I stuck to doing things like opening people's arteries.
Mm.
But it started, as you point out, with my mom dying of sudden cardiac death about 4 months after her successful 2-vessel coronary angioplasty. She lived in New Jersey, where I grew up. I had just moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where they brought me in to set up all the new technologies. It was the Wild West age of what's called interventional cardiology. Cutting devices, lasers, stents, all that stuff. We're going back now 30 years plus.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought me in to set up hospitals to do all the new technology. And here my mom dies just a few months into my move here of sudden cardiac death after a procedure that I was teaching other physicians to do.
Wow.
So it was a kick upside my head to say, hey, what you're doing in a cath lab in a hospital is grotesquely inadequate. Opening people's arteries as they're having a heart attack or they had angina or they were having other symptoms after a bypass operation, whatever, was clearly inadequate. So I asked, what could I have done, say, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years before my mom died to have stopped that, prevented it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, back then, the only tool really was cholesterol testing, which is ridiculously inadequate. If you have a total cholesterol of 240, are you going to have a heart attack tomorrow? 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Ever? You can't tell. It's garbage, nonsense. Well, then there was a new technology called coronary calcium scoring.
Yeah.
Because calcium comprises 20% of total plaque volume, atherosclerotic plaque volume. My friend, Dr. John Rumberger, while at Mayo Clinic, validated that idea. And then the South Beach diet author, Dr. Arthur Agatston, developed a scoring system. So this is all some 35 or more years ago. So I got the funding together. We opened a scan center. It was called Milwaukee Heart Scan. It was one of the first ones in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
And we started scanning people. And these are people like you and me, Natalie. These are people not having heart attacks, not in the emergency room having chest pain. These are people like going to work, riding their bicycles, going to school, no symptoms. But when you look for hidden heart disease in the years before trouble starts, you find it everywhere. Well, what do? Well, back then, the solution was high-dose statin drug like Lipitor 40 milligrams, baby aspirin, low-fat, low-saturated fat diet, exercise program. So we did that. We helped publish these data. If you do nothing and you have a score, normal score is 0. So let's say your score is 400, which is a pretty high score.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty high for males, very high for females. What happens if you do nothing? Well, it increases 25% per year. So 400 to start, 500, 625, and with each leap, you're close to dying, heart attack, symptoms that justify bypass surgery or stent implantation. Well, we help publish these data. What happens if you go on baby aspirin, Lipitor, 40 milligrams, low-fat diet, exercise? How fast that score increase? 25% per year. It has no impact at all. What do? At the street level, people are freaking out on me. They're saying, what do I do? Of course, my colleagues say, we'll do preventive heart catheterization, bypass surgery, and stent implantation. Not because it benefits me. It does not benefit people who are asymptomatic, but it makes a lot of money. There's a ton of money to be made by doing inappropriate procedures. This is the order of the day. It's done every day in every city. Inappropriate procedures. Well, I refuse to do that. So what do? Well, if the conventional solutions don't work, it took me some years of zigzagging, trial and error, logic, etc. But I learned all these new lessons. Mm-hmm. For instance, adding vitamin D. You and I live in a northern climate, and people are miserably vitamin D deficient. When I added vitamin D, that is a dose sufficient to raise your 25-hydroxy vitamin D blood level to about 60 to 70, what you get from a nice dark suntan.
Yeah.
I saw calcium scores plummet. A score of 700, say, a year later would be 350, something like that. But it
Wow.
also led to this. I also rejected this idea that cholesterol was a satisfactory biomarker. It is not. It should have been thrown away 40, 50 years ago. There are superior tests, but it takes a little bit more education on the part of the doc to do that. It also means rejecting drugs because you'll learn very quickly that coronary disease, as judged by lipoprotein testing, not cholesterol testing, the particles in the bloodstream that cause heart disease, you'll learn right away. It is a disease of nutrition. Has nothing to do with cholesterol, has nothing to do with saturated fat, has everything to do with, and the science, Natalie, the science had been worked out then from University of California, Berkeley, from Hopkins. The evidence was crystal clear. It's small LDL particles, not LDL cholesterol, but small LDL particles. And we're going back 30 some years.
That goes back 30 years?
30 years.
And they're still not testing. I mean, in Canada, I don't even think you can get a VLDL test.
Unless you pay out of pocket, maybe, and have to travel many miles to get it done. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Here, likewise, except that it is available.
A little more accessible there. You can go to a Quest.
But the docs will say, "Oh, Natalie, we don't do that here." Or did you consult Dr. Google again? or there's no science behind, or some other BS answer. Natalie, there are 55 clinical trials now showing that small LDL particles are dramatically superior to conventional measures like LDL cholesterol. So, and this science was clear 30 plus years ago. Mm-hmm. What causes an explosion in this marker for heart disease, small LDL particles? It's well sorted out. Wheat, grains, and sugar. Not saturated fat, not bacon, not olive oil, not butter, not red meat. Wheat, grains, and sugar. So I had all these people who are terrified. They have a high coronary calcium score, or they were survivors of sudden cardiac death, or had received 3 stents and a bypass or whatever. I'd say, hey, listen, clearly the conventional answer is not working for you. Your disease is progressing rapidly. Let's try this. So I'd give them a 2-page handout, eliminate wheat, grains, and sugars. Don't limit fat, don't limit calories, none of that stuff. They'd come back. Maybe they start with, so we'd use something called nuclear magnetic resonance, just one of the methods to quantify lipoproteins. They'd start, maybe it'd say 2,000 nanomoles per liter, particle count per volume. They'd go wheat, grain, and sugar free, and small LDL would be 0. It wasn't like 20% better or 30, it was eliminated. But here's where people came back and said, oh, okay, my small LDL is now 0. And you didn't tell me I would lose 8 inches off my waist. You didn't tell me I'd have to stop my insulin and other diabetes drugs because I was no longer diabetic. Mm-hmm. You didn't tell me I'd have to stop 3 blood pressure medicines. I was getting so lightheaded I had to stop them. You didn't tell me my rheumatoid arthritis would be so much better I could stop the biologic and the naproxen. So at first I thought, what in the world? Why? Mm-hmm. As I dived into this and talked to agricultural scientists, et cetera, it became clear that one of the major there's more than to diet than just elimination of wheat, of course.
Yeah.
But elimination of wheat eliminated a whole bunch of problems. It's the amylopectin A, for instance. It's the carbohydrate unique to grains that provokes formation of small LDL. So the American Heart Association diet, cut your fat, saturated fat, eat more healthy whole grains, causes heart disease. So it's the amylopectin A elimination that led to the elimination of small LDL particles. It was elimination of the gliadin-derived opioid peptide. So there's a protein called gliadin, of course, in wheat and grains that converts to opioid peptides, and that is an appetite stimulant. Mm-hmm. So people first went through a brief withdrawal process, about 5 days of nausea, headaches, depression, fatigue, and then felt wonderful. And they lost their appetite. The incessant appetite of grain consumption went away.
Yeah.
And so people said, you know what, I don't eat until about noon, and then I'm satisfied, and I might have something later in the day, and I'm satisfied. There was no purposeful reduction in calories. It was the elimination of a potent appetite stimulant. And so I stumbled on this, and I didn't do it on purpose. Mm-hmm. But at first, I had real qualms about this because I thought, now, wait a minute. I'm proposing something that's contrary to everything the dietary community says, mm-hmm. my colleagues, the USDA, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Health Canada, everybody agrees. You must cut your fat and eat more healthy whole grains. But doing the opposite generated spectacular changes in health.
Yeah. No, it's pretty dramatic, right? And so here you are, and so you write this amazing book, The Wheat Belly, which made huge waves. But now the new book goes a little deeper. And I love that, right? Because, and you said it yourself in the introduction in this book, you're like, so I noticed this wheat belly diet and it moved the needle for people. They got better, they lost weight, things got better. And then they hit a wall. And then it was like, okay, wait, we're not done. But you know what I love about that approach? And especially like as a nutritionist, when I used to work with clients, I used to say to them, let's just knock out this stuff. Let's see where it takes us. And then let's see what's the next thing we need to work on, because you never know what's going to resolve in that laundry list of symptoms that people show up with when you kind of get as far upstream as possible, kind of thing. Right. So, it's kind of like you're seeing the path open in front of you. And now you come to your next crossing. Let's not call it a hurdle or a wall. Let's call it a crossing. And so the new crossing now that you've come to is the microbiome. It's that gut health, that gut environment. So let's talk a little bit about that. How did you make that leap? Because it's a natural progression in many ways, but it might not be when you're sitting there going, okay, it's wheat and sugar, wheat and sugar, wheat and sugar. Like,
so true, Natalie, and spoken by someone who clearly has the scars of many years of clinical practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. So, for instance, someone would say, I did wheat, grain, and sugar elimination, and I added several nutrients that are lacking in modern life. Vitamin D. We live in northern climates where aging loses the capacity to activate vitamin D in the skin as we get older. Magnesium, because we drink filtered water, we have to. There's sewage and other crap in water.
Yep.
Iodine, because we live inland. We don't live at the ocean, most of us, and we don't get foods rich in iodine, etc. So we did all that, and yet people would say something like this. Okay, I lost 68 pounds. I'm no longer a type 2 diabetic. I feel much better. My waistline is 12 inches smaller, but I still have some bloating and diarrhea. Or my rheumatoid arthritis is better. I got off the biologic and I got off the prednisone, but I'm still on naproxen because I have occasional flare-ups. Yeah. Or I was a former type 2 diabetic. My hemoglobin A1C, that reflection of long-term blood glucose, was 11.7. I was on my way to kidney failure and blindness, amputation. It's now 6.3, much better, but not perfect. Perfect is less than 5. Yeah. Well, they would do the wheat, grain, sugar and achieve those kinds of results, but it was clear there was something else, as you pointed out. There was something not being addressed. And by the way, this was with high-potency multi-species probiotics, prebiotic fibers, and fermented foods. So I thought, no, what else can you do? Well, diving into the questions about the microbiome yielded additional insights. And virtually all those residual problems, Natalie, just went away. They finally got corrected. One of the turning points for me was this little device. The Air device.
Right. You mentioned that in the book. So does that attach to your phone?
Yes. So there's a prep diet. You blow into it after consuming something that microbes feed on, like inulin powder. Yeah. You blow into it, talks to your smartphone. This is the original, measures only hydrogen gas because microbes produce hydrogen, but we don't. Right. So here's the newer device, and I have no relationship with the company. I know the inventor, Dr. Angus Short in Dublin, Ireland. This is the more recent device that measures hydrogen gas and methane. Yeah. It's like $150, $200.
That's it. So let me get that from you because so it's the Air, AIRE device, right?
Yes. The company is Food Marble. And now Angus, the inventor, invented this years ago for his wife because she had irritable bowel syndrome and she was told to go on a low FODMAPs diet, which is really stupid. But nonetheless, she wanted to put on a low FODMAPs
but
diet.
It helps people sometimes.
It reduces symptoms. But she would get exposed occasionally to something and she'd get sick. So he invented this device to tell her if that was the cause, exposure to unwanted FODMAP containing foods.
Wow. That's
Well, I
fascinating.
called him up. I said, Angus, you could use it for that purpose, but it's really a mapping device. It tells you where microbes are living in the 30 feet of your GI tract. So there's a specific way to use this. There's a prep diet devoid of all fibers, alcohol, and sugars. Then you do a baseline next morning. Let's say it's a 0 to 10 scale for hydrogen gas. Let's say it's really low, 1.2, whatever. Then you consume some that microbes consume and metabolize the hydrogen gas, test every 30 to 45 minutes over about 90 minutes. Let's say at 45 minutes goes up to 9.8. Well, that kind of hydrogen gas production should occur normally in the colon, but that's too fast. 45 minutes is too fast for that inulin or other fiber to have reached your colon. So you know microbes metabolize it in your stomach, duodenum, jejunum, or ileum.
Right.
So it's a mapping device. That's all. And by the way, people don't have to have this device. It is useful. It's an option for people to have. But when I started talking about this, and I had thousands of people getting this device and testing, lo and behold, not everyone, but almost everyone tested positive. I thought,
Wow.
what?
This is for SIBO, for small intestinal bacteria.
Yes.
So this is for, basically, this is the condition where bacteria, like microbes that naturally should be living in the lower GI, have migrated up into the upper GI, and that's where they cause all this trouble, like bloating and gas.
Exactly. I call this the fecalization of America and Canada. That is
a bit rough.
Yeah. I know.
It's a bit gross if you really think about it.
It is when you think, yes. It's the ascendance of fecal species like E. coli and Klebsiella and Salmonella and Campylobacter up from the colon where they're supposed to be into the 24 feet of small bowel. So it took me by surprise. Natalie, I even wrote in some of my earlier books that SIBO is rare. It's not rare.
Or maybe it's changed.
It could. I think it's getting worse by the day.
And what does drive SIBO? What causes those bacteria to move up? Do you know? Is it like chronic constipation? Like what drives that migration, as it were?
Sadly, the science is not that solid. We do know that antibiotic exposure does that.
Okay.
But the science gets a little bit thin when you speculate about other causes, but it's very likely. It's glyphosate. It's other herbicides and pesticides. It's chlorinated drinking water. It's food additives like preservatives, which are antimicrobial in food and in your GI tract.
Yeah, sure.
Emulsifying agents, constipation, H2 and PPI drugs that reduce stomach acid, stress. So it's a whole range of things. Now, I thought it was rare, but the emergence of this air device showed it was common.
Yeah.
So I asked this question, well, how common is it? So I didn't have to generate this evidence. Surprisingly, this evidence was already available by asking this question. In condition blank, what proportion of people test positive for SIBO, hydrogen gas, or other methods? Well, how about let's consider irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah.
In the 60 to 70 million Americans alone in this country, what proportion test positive? It varies from study to study, but about 31%. So that's 18 to 20 million people right there. How about in obesity? What proportion will test positive? About 50%. So 50% of the 110 million or so obese Americans, add another 55 million to the list. Go through fibromyalgia, restless leg syndrome, sleep apnea, type 2 diabetes, type 1 diabetes, autoimmune conditions, neurodegenerative disorders. You easily exceed 160 million people in the US, easily 15 million people in Canada, easily. So we're talking about the world's worst epidemic ever in the history of our species on this planet, caused by all the factors unique to modern life.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about those factors that you mentioned, they're unavoidable. From the glyphosates to like none of us are able to eat an organic diet all the time, even if we wanted to. If you live in a major city like we both do, you're going to be exposed to toxins just by stepping out the door. We I mean, I filter my water. I'm sure you do too. I've got air filters in my house. That's great. It doesn't help me when I'm not home. I mean, I suppose I could walk around in a bubble. That wouldn't be great. And then but then the next layer is the emotional factors, right? The stress and the reduction in stomach acid, which I think is also epidemic for any number of reasons, and you don't even need to be taking a PPI for reduction in stomach acid. It happens with age. So, and then you layer on stress and all the other things. So at some level, as I was reading the book, as I was going through it, I was thinking, well, if someone didn't get the AIRS device and they said, okay, my gut's not perfect. I'm kind of gassy and bloated every once in a while. I can probably, I don't have perfect poops every single day. What would be the downside of doing a 4-week plan? Let's say that, because you do a really nice job in this book. You outlay like a 4-week program where we're going to remove, and this is the step that we often miss, right? We're like, well, what can I buy? What can I take? How can I fix it? We often don't think about what can I take away before I start adding stuff. Is there a downside to somebody doing this 4-week program, even if they technically might not have SIBO?
Well, if I said, Natalie, if the solution was, Natalie, we're going to surgically remove 10 feet of your small intestine, you should say, whoa, hold on, buddy. You better be damn confident this is true before you do. But what if the solution could be something that looks and smells like yogurt that you make in your kitchen?
Yeah.
And tastes fine, add some blueberries and chia seeds. And not only do you cause the reversal of infesting fecal microbes in your small intestine, but you also get a reduction in skin wrinkles and a restoration of youthful musculature, and an increase in libido, and an increase in the intensity of love and affection for people close to you, a need for human companionship, acceptance of other people's opinions.
There's an idea.
Vaginal restoration of vaginal moisture, a 50% rise in testosterone, acceleration of healing and amplification of the immune response. Well, how confident do you have to be? You don't have to be confident. It's so easy. So my rationale was this, Natalie. If we know you have SIBO, you tested H2 positive, or your gastroenterologist did a endoscopy and obtained an aspirate, a sample of the liquid in your duodenum, and examined it for microbes. It's filled with fecal microbes.
Yeah.
So you have SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Well, and it's likely responsible for the joint pain of your rheumatoid arthritis, or the skin rash of rosacea, or declining cognitive ability in dementia, or your weight gain in your abdomen and type 2 diabetes. Well, if you took a probiotic off the shelf, what's the likelihood this would go away?
Pretty slim.
Virtually zero. Yeah. You might get a reduction in bloating and diet, but you won't get rid of the 30 feet of fecal microbes in your small intestine, in your GI tract. So I asked these questions, Natalie, and my hopes were low. I did not expect all this to unfold. I asked, well, what if we chose microbes that are known to colonize the small intestine, where SIBO occurs, and are known to produce what are called bacteriocins, natural antibiotics that kill fecal microbes? So I chose 3 originally: Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri, and Bacillus coagulans, which I now replace with Bacillus subtilis. Those are microbes that either colonize, or in the case of the Bacillus species, germinate with their spores in the small intestine and kill off fecal microbes. Well, I thought I'd do this just to help people get some relief. No, to my great surprise, 90% of people who did this converted to hydrogen gas negative with the AIR device, and was followed by a breakthrough in some aspect of health. They finally broke the weight plateau. Their hemoglobin A1C finally dropped into 4 range. Their headaches finally went away, or their diarrhea finally, whatever. I saw normalization of hydrogen gas measures and relief from some residual health problem. And I now call this SIBO yogurt. Now, I regret calling it that, Natalie, because it gives the impression it's only useful for SIBO.
It sounds like it's just rebalancing that upper GI microbiome. That's what it's doing.
And, the only side effect is that you get some headaches, anxiety, nightmares from the die-off process early on because you're killing fecal microbes. And those are nasty.
Yeah.
They have components in their cell wall that can make you sick. And so when you kill them, you get a little sick for a few days.
Is that the endotoxins? I think
Yes, it's the certain endotoxemia. Exactly right.
Martha talks about those, Martha Carlin.
Yes, yes. So that's the only side effect. But it's an intended effect, actually. But then you see all kinds of other things. You see all those other benefits, the loss of skin wrinkles, the restoration of youthful musculature, all the oxytocin-driven effects, increased empathy, generosity, acceptance of other people's opinions. So, Natalie, a lot of this took me by surprise, but what I'm seeing now is it is literally life-changing. But you can redo it for 4 weeks to eradicate SIBO or longer in people who have had really bad problems. So if you said, I took antibiotics for 4 years for acne or whatever, you may have to do it for longer than that. But I also encourage people to do it forever. Maybe not every day, but maybe every 3 times, 4 times a week. Because, if you get effects like youthful musculature, reduction of abdominal fat, loss of skin wrinkles, do it all the time. So I think what I did, not purposefully, once again, not on purpose, was restore keystone microbes lost from the small bowel. That's what we did. Now, we need to do a formal clinical trial. We can't do it with yogurt that people make because it introduces too many uncontrollable variables. We'll have to do it probably in capsule form or something like that. We have a number of clinical trials that are either ongoing or going to be done. That's one of them. So to prove that SIBO is something that is wildly prevalent, but very manageable. Now, one of the problems is what I did not do is say, do this once and never have to do it again because the microbes take up residence. But I don't know how to do that. No one knows how to do that. If your mom gave you reuteri, for instance, you'd have it for a lifetime if you and your mom weren't exposed to antibiotics and all those other factors. But if you get it as a yogurt or other fermented food, you'll have it for a few days to weeks. Well, why? Why doesn't it take up permanent residence? Well, no one knows why, but it's probably because of the lack of a community that supports that one microbe. We don't yet know what that community looks like.
Right. Well, I'm glad you said that because I was going to ask you, every expert in this area, including you that I talk to, anybody who's an expert and not an influencer is going to acknowledge there's more that we don't know than what we do know. Right. So what you've hit upon right now is a strategy and a methodology that helps to move the needle for people and get better results. And if we have to keep moving that needle because it keeps wanting to come back, so be it. It seems like a fairly painless way to do it. So, but let's talk also about SIFO, because in the book you talk about, in addition to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, very often that comes with a concomitant, if you will, fungal overgrowth as well. So is that, again, that migration of fungi from the lower GI into the upper GI, or is that a separate issue altogether?
It's unfortunately, the science is so preliminary. We don't know what proportion of people who have fungal overgrowth have small intestinal involvement, because it requires upper endoscopy to get the aspirate, the liquid from your duodenum or upper jejunum. So we don't have sufficient evidence. It's my opinion, though, that the majority of people, what they have SIBO allows fungal overgrowth in the colon, and SIFO, involvement of the small intestine.
Right.
And it's a lot tougher than SIBO to identify because there's no air device.
There's no gas. Yeah.
No gas test. Right.
Right.
You have to do a stool analysis, and stool analysis, as you well know, is a rectal sample. It doesn't tell you anything about the jejunum or the ileum or the ascending colon, for that matter. It just tells you what's going on in the rectum. So we have to accept that stool analysis is a limited tool. It's a tool of limited usefulness.
And so do you use it much? Do you think it's very helpful? Because that was one of the things we talked about before we hit record, is how helpful do you think stool analysis really is? Because it is very limited in its geography of what it's sampling, and it's a moment in time. And we know that the microbiome can change fairly dramatically in a
Absolutely.
short
And
period of time.
I know you know Martha Carlin
Yeah.
and her business partner, Raul Cano, PhD, a friend of mine. They did something extraordinary. They formed something called the Bio Collective.
Yeah.
And they collected the full bowel movement, not a rectal sample, not just a little bit, but the entire bowel movement of 1,000.
Martha is hardcore, you guys. I've had her on the podcast before. This woman is hardcore. Anyway, sorry, keep going. They collected the full bowel movement of 1,000
of a
people. Yeah.
thousand people, and then analyzed it, and then compared it to a standard rectal sample. And there was almost no resemblance. So
No kidding.
yeah. So as you point out, Natalie, the rectal sample is just a little snapshot in time and location. It does help,
Mm.
but you can't put too much weight on what a little rectal sample. Now, what's better than that? Not a lot. No one's going to have a colonoscopy to retrieve an ileal or ascending colon sample, so we're stuck with this flawed technology, but it can reveal some things. It could show, for instance, an overgrowth of proteobacteria, that is fecal microbes. It could show an overabundance of so-called methanogens, methane-producing microbes. It could show some parasites like blastocystis or Entamoeba histolytica. So there is value to it, but you can't put a whole bunch of weight into it because it's a rectal sample.
Yeah.
So I do, Natalie, it's just and it's very expensive sometimes. Some of these tests cost upwards of $600 or $700 a shot.
Yeah.
So what I've done is just more practical. Let's take some basic steps to reorder your microbiome. Let's make sure you're getting lots of fermented foods. Let's make sure you're removed all those factors that disrupt the microbiome, like processed foods and sugars. Filter your water, organic foods whenever possible. Let's reintroduce some of those keystone microbes like reuteri and gasseri. And if you say, okay, I'm better, but I'm not perfect, I still have issues, then maybe we resort to stool testing, see what little holes there might be in your program. So that more practical and less expensive for most people process has worked pretty well.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it. And it makes sense, right? Because I think that if we go from the premise, I mean, you identify in all those populations of people you listed out earlier, people who are obese, people with mental health issues, people with type 2 diabetes, people, and if we say that such a huge percentage of those people, if we can believe that they have that imbalance, right? We won't even let's not call it a pathology. Let's call it an imbalance. And it's so easy to rebalance. Then why not do that as your first step? And just like we talked about earlier, see what's left to then decide what the next steps should be. When you're talking about, it's a very sexy list. Youthful muscle, better skin, better sex, better relationships. These are the hallmarks of longevity and health span that we're all looking for. Are you saying, well, is the implication that microbial population is really driving a lot of the hormonal imbalances that we're seeing in people as well? Like it seems so foundational, right? We talk about DNA damage. Like if we look at the hallmarks of aging, right? Misfolded proteins, mitochondrial dysfunction, DNA damage, all of these things. And yet here we are messing with the microbiome and saying, I don't really know how, but all this other stuff, it's fixing itself. Do you have any theories in there? That area?
So I won't pretend. Now, one claim I never made is longevity. Of course, no one knows what generates.
Oh no, but if you have more youthful muscles, if a lot of these things, these will create. Let's just say they'll create an environment where we can start to imagine that we might live a longer, healthier life. I mean, if we can keep our brain working, for starters, that would be a good one. I would also invite you to go back to your roots a little bit and talk about how this healthier microbiome is going to support better cardiovascular health, or, better blood vessels and inflammation. Like inflammation, we didn't talk about this earlier, but inflammation is a key component of cardiovascular disease, of that plaque formation. So Anyway, I've just left you with a bit of a swamp of different questions in different areas. So I'm going to let you pick and choose your way there. Sorry.
Well, the evidence relating the microbiome. So an important thing for your listeners to recognize is, so how do microbes, though, but specifically in the small intestine, how does that translate? How does that cause or contribute to cognitive impairment in the brain, or anxiety or depression, or a skin rash of rosacea or psoriasis, or premature labor in a pregnant woman, or prostate disease in a guy, or a rise in testosterone from Leydig cell production of testosterone, or joint pain of rheumatoid arthritis or how? Well, it's become clear that those fecal microbial species living in the small intestine is ill-equipped to deal with fecal microbes. The colon is perfectly happy with fecal microbes to a degree, but the small intestine is not. The small intestine is made for absorption of amino acids and fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. And so it's very permeable. Well, when you have fecal microbes infesting the small intestines, we're talking about trillions of microbes who are very inflammatory. They inflame the small intestinal wall, increasing its permeability. When those trillions of microbes die, because they only live for a few hours, they release some of their toxic components, especially something called endotoxin and some other things like lipoteichoic acid. They release those toxic compounds into the intestine that then penetrates into the bloodstream. That's called endotoxemia. So we know people with rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, Parkinson's disease, coronary disease, atrial fibrillation, all those conditions have much higher levels of endotoxin in their bloodstream. And that's how microbes in the small intestine export effects to other parts of the body. This is becoming a huge issue, and Natalie, it's epidemic. It's half or more of all humans in North America. Now, as you know, this is not translated into clinical practice. If you go to your gastroenterologist and say, hey, doc, I think I have SIBO and endotoxemia driving my psoriasis or my depression. He says, oh, Natalie, did you consult Dr. Google again? Or I didn't see anything on your colonoscopy. There's nothing wrong with you. It's in your imagination because you don't see it. You don't see that process by a scope. And so there's going to be probably a 2-generation lag in this achieving wide recognition in clinical practice. Well, you and I and your listeners are not going to wait 30, 40 years for the answers. So we've got to take the reins ourselves because the gastroenterologists are too busy making money doing 14 colonoscopies and endoscopies per day. They don't care. By the way, I know a lot of gastroenterologists, and they tell me this. I have a friend who's an MD, PhD, gastroenterologist and biochemist. I said to him, hey, how are you managing SIBO? Oh, I don't. You know what? If the patient says to me, I think I have SIBO, I say, go back to your primary care. Don't bother me because I have 14 colonoscopies to do today. That is what's going on. It's worse here because it's much more of a profit-driven system in the U.S. It's an absolute disaster, Natalie. So it means that your listeners, you and me, have to take the reins ourselves. Thankfully, you point out very appropriately, there's so much we don't know. There really is so much we don't know, but there is a lot we do know. And it's happening at rapid fire. And by the way, one of the most exciting things to emerge from the whole world of this microbiome is, yes, SIBO, that's really cool to know about. But it's also that virtually every organ has its own unique microbiome signature.
I know.
Yeah,
that's just a whole other universe.
This came to light for me recently because I have a daughter-in-law who's working on her third child. She's not going to deliver in a few months. And, Natalie, this is a woman who has no shortage of resources, medical resources. She's got a gastroenterologist, an endocrinologist, a gynecologist, an obstetrician, a primary care doc, a functional medicine doc.
All the things.
No one told her, for instance, that there are basic fundamental steps she must take to avoid miscarriage and premature delivery. And there are insights. For instance, there's a microbe called Lactobacillus crispatus. It's the dominant microbe in the human vagina that many ladies have lost. So I should mention that one of the reasons why all this works, what we're doing, what you and I are talking about, is because a lot of these microbes, like Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus gasseri, Lactobacillus crispatus, are very susceptible to common antibiotics.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you took amoxicillin 20 years ago for an upper respiratory infection or a urinary tract infection, you wiped out most of these beneficial microbes. Well, Lactobacillus crispatus, so the vaginal microbiome, very different from the gastrointestinal microbiome. Gastrointestinal, very complicated, thousands of species, trillions of microbes. The vaginal microbiome, much more definable, much more predictable. And the dominant microbe in the vaginal canal is supposed to be Lactobacillus crispatus. That many ladies have lost. What happens when you lose it? You're much more prone to miscarriage, premature labor. And as you know, if a woman delivers a premature child, say at 28 weeks, that child's life is going to be a real problem. They have immunologic, neurological, psychological problems. So anything you can do to delay delivery to the full term is very beneficial. And crispatus is one of the things. And the reason for that is when you lose that very important microbe and you allow other microbes to take over, like Gardnerella or Adipobium, it inflames the cervix, and the cervix relaxes prematurely, and you lose your child or you deliver your child. So Lactobacillus, and even more interestingly, Natalie, Lactobacillus crispatus, so meant to be present in young women to prevent vaginitis, candida vaginitis, urinary tract infections. So that's one of the more recent discoveries. A lot of elegant work from Loyola University right here in Chicago where I am. And they've shown that crispatus colonizes the bladder, where it reduces the frequency of urinary tract infections dramatically.
If it's present.
And reduces incontinence, urge or stress incontinence, coughing, sneezing, you pee, which is a terrible problem for a woman to have.
And so how do we restore this?
Well, it's a problem. So one of the problems.
How does it get restored?
So the science often precedes the commercial availability.
Yeah.
So one of the things I'm doing is trying to make them available. Unfortunately, my source won't be available probably for another 4 weeks or so, but we'll make a strain of crispatus chosen for characteristics that confer these effects. The microbe has to produce lactic acid, for instance, that discourages other microbes, has to produce those bacteriocins that kills E. coli, things like that. So I'll have that available through me in about 4 weeks or so. Right now, the only source I'm aware of is a commercial product called Jarrow Femdophilus Advanced. Problem: they included crispatus with a bunch of other microbes like Lactobacillus jensenii, Lactobacillus ioners, and some others that I'm not convinced are necessary and may even be mildly harmful. But until I can make the crispatus by itself available, that is the only source I'm aware of. Interestingly, so one of the things we do in restoring these microbes, of course, is we ferment them as yogurt. It's not yogurt. It looks and smells like yogurt, but it's not yogurt. It has nothing to do with the stuff in the grocery store.
No, yeah, right. Got it.
Well, you can also ferment crispatus, and it makes, to my great surprise, the most delicious yogurt you ever had.
So you would eat the crispatus and it would repopulate the vaginal canal, or
Yes.
or would this be so my little simple brain here is saying, well, why wouldn't you use a vaginal suppository of crispatus? Could that not help?
You could, but I'm very reluctant to have a woman insert something because that's how you infect your vagina. I know ladies do that, but the science has become clear. A woman can ingest something orally. It will colonize the correct species, not all species, but certain species like crispatus will colonize the vagina. Now, how? There's no connection that we know of.
No.
Is it just nearness or contiguity in the perineum, the groin area? And then even more remarkably, Natalie, it colonizes the bladder. Who would have thought? Because we all thought the bladder was sterile, right? And if you get E. coli,
Nothing's sterile in the body. I mean, let's face it.
That's
I think sterility is a notion that has to be dismissed when it comes to the human body because it hasn't served us, right? The whole what is it? The germ theory has pretty much just about destroyed humanity, right?
So thankfully, and this has not trickled down to many scientists and healthcare practitioners. I was talking to some scientists in Northwestern University, so reputable professors of various sciences. They're talking about having to put a needle through the abdominal wall into the bladder. I told them, no, don't do that. That one is very dangerous.
Painful.
What if you miss? You could ruin somebody's life. They need surgical repair. You hit an artery, all kinds of. So I told them, you need to restore it orally because the science is clear. A woman can take a microbe orally. It will communicate with the vagina. That will in turn communicate with the bladder. They're all connected. And by the way, the same is also true for the prostate in a male.
Mm-hmm.
The prostate, diseased prostates, whether it's prostatitis, benign prostatic hypertrophy, or prostate cancer, if you were to analyze the microbes in a prostate gland, it's got skin microbes like Cutibacterium. It's got urine microbes. It's got stool microbes. It has microbes from virtually every organ. So I call the prostate gland, by the way, the grand central station of the microbiome, because everything traffics through this little organ.
Yeah.
To some degree, the uterus, cervix, and vagina are kind of similar.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that get access to the vagina abnormally that shouldn't be there.
Right. And so for your daughter-in-law who's expecting this baby, is she in the boat with Dr. Davis? Is she eating the bacteria? Is she eating the yogurt now before it's
or at
commercially
least getting
available?
the probiotic. Yeah. The crispatus, another real important, omega-3 fatty acids, by the way, are also extremely important because the evidence is crystal clear. It's one of the most important things a woman can do to not have premature labor.
Mm-hmm.
And yet the vast majority, 99+% of women are not getting omega-3 fatty acids or getting a stupid dose, a real low dose, because as you know, my colleagues say idiotic things like, oh, don't take too much fish oil. It makes you bleed or hemorrhage, which is complete nonsense. There's no such thing. So omega-3 is also extremely important, shown to be very effective in delaying premature delivery, so much so that you often go longer than 40 weeks.
Right.
Another important microbe for the infant, not so much for mom, is Bifidobacter infantis.
Mm-hmm.
So interesting, Natalie. So the baby's microbiome in the first year, unlike adult microbiome, is meant to be dominated by this one species, Bifidobacter infantis. And that's because that microbe allows that child to metabolize breast milk, but specifically the human milk oligosaccharides that are essential for neurological maturation. Well, problem, a lot of women have lost Bifidobacter infantis and can't pass it on to their child. So you have a child, even if it's breastfed, cannot take full advantage of the nutrients in breast milk. That child is more likely to have impaired neurological maturation, a lower IQ, more prone to asthma, type 1 diabetes, other autoimmune conditions, more likely to become obese and a type 2 diabetic as an adolescent. So restoring infantis. Now there's a company called the product called Avivo. I have no relationship. EVIVO. And they have a strain of infantis that you can buy. And you're supposed to mix it, this powder, and now a liquid. They just reissued as a liquid in breast milk and feed it to your child. But I would say let's do better. Let's make it yogurt or other fermented food and have mom consume it before delivery. Yeah. And let mom give the child infantis the way it's supposed to be. Because so mom consumes the yogurt. And by the way, the advantage of yogurt is we're increasing bacterial counts 100 to 1,000-fold by doing that. Using my method, by the way, of prolonged fermentation.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that before we end this podcast. There's no way we're not talking about that. So for moms to be, do you see a world where you could almost list the composition of yogurt or yogurts? I don't know if you would put them all in one or if they can coexist properly or not, that moms to be would consume before or during the pregnancy, just to ensure that they create this great environment for the baby. And then because we all have disrupted microbiomes at this point, and I know that's a sweeping statement, but at this point, the odds are that, you can't find a person out there who's got a perfect microbiome. So let's assume that for people who are creating new lives, and look, you're talking to someone who gave birth to a child at 28 weeks. So I'm pretty well versed in that world. But that, is it possible that you could almost create a maternal, just like we have maternal vitamins, right? That there would be a maternal recipe for yogurt that would help to give moms those keystones, those species, both for the vaginal biome and for the baby, that would essentially ensure that they kind of keep those colonies alive while they're pregnant. And so that after delivery, and not to mention giving them a better shot at a normal, healthy delivery.
Yes. So that menu currently includes Lactobacillus crispatus for its molding effects on the vaginal microbiome and delaying early delivery, Bifidobacterium infantis for the benefit of the child, the baby, and Lactobacillus reuteri, our friend. So reuteri is responsible for facilitating uterine contraction at birth. It also facilitates expression of breast milk. So a lot of ladies who say, I can't breastfeed, it's not working, there's not enough milk, or I can't get it out, or whatever, that's a reuteri effect, via oxytocin, by the way. And the increase in postpartum depression is a loss of reuteri effect also. So now here's the problem, though, Natalie. What if at some point we say, okay, Natalie, maybe your daughter is going to get pregnant. What microbes should you ferment? And we list 10 microbes. Well, come on, how much can you ferment? And so at some point we have to find a better way to do this. But right now, the best way is to ferment it. Usually is yogurt because dairy is so forgiving. It could be coconut milk. It could be hummus. It could be juices. You can ferment all kinds of things. But dairy is just so easy to do. Because with reuteri, for instance, you start with a few million microbes typically, and you get a few hundreds of billions by using this process of fermentation. Wow. So reuteri, for instance, doubles it. Microbes, of course, don't have sex. They just double themselves. And reuteri doubles every 3 hours at human body temperature. So I just reasoned, let's let it double 12 times, 36 hours at human body temperature. We counted the microbes using something called flow cytometry, and we get about 300 billion per half cup or 120 milliliter serving. And that's part of the reason why I think you get these huge biological effects. Because if you take it as a probiotic, you will get benefits. But the original microbe I used, the original strain I used, was made for infants. So I had very low counts for an adult. That was my original motivation for making yogurt. I've since come out with our own sources of reuteri. It's called My Reuteri, and starts higher numbers, 10 billion or 20 billion, depending which product you buy. But even then, is that sufficient? It probably is for some purposes. But if you're dealing with SIBO and you're fighting trillions of fecal species, you probably want hundreds of billions.
Yeah.
So that's the advantage of fermentation, using this method of prolonged fermentation.
Great. Okay. So if anybody here is listening, is about to have a baby or is thinking of having a baby or knows someone who's having a baby, you're going to want to direct them to this work, because I think that, with all these issues we're seeing in children now, I mean, I'm not going to say that it all goes back to one thing, but a disrupted microbiome from the beginning of life is not going to help things. Let's just be conservative and say that. And if we can at least level the playing field there, then we give our babies a better chance. I got lucky. Like, clearly I had a lot of things going on. My son's now 24 years old, second year law, crushing it. We're good. but I also know I got lucky, because in that NICU, there were a lot of babies that didn't get lucky. So moving on to our more adult population. Now let's just move into maybe some of the advice we would give people with the rest of the world, right? And I don't know that it's going to be that different for someone with metabolic imbalances or cardiovascular issues. Like you've been talking about, saying that if we say that SIBO is prevalent, and frankly, a lot of these health issues, this constellation of health issues, could very easily be enabled by this foundational imbalance in the gut. Let's just maybe summarize a little bit some of the things that people should really be doing, other than running out and buying your book, looking at the 4-week reset. But can we give people a list? Like, what are the 4 foods? I mean, I want to say 5 foods because we know what the first couple are going to be already. So are there other things that we can point people to maybe right away cutting out of their diet, and 5 foods to add? And I do find it's really interesting that in the diet wars, you're kind of taking a whole different position, right? You're like, carnivore, schmarnivore, vegan, whatever. Here's what you need. I don't really care how you get it. Figure it out. Here's what you need. So I'd love you to weigh in on that as well. We know that wheat's not part of the equation, but so let's start with those 5 foods that pretty much people should just think about eliminating. And it could be drinks too. I don't know where alcohol fits into the world for you, but 5 things.
Well, yes, wheat, grains, and sugars. I think a lot about what happens to indigenous populations, hunter-gatherer populations. They, of course, don't grow wheat. They don't grow corn. They don't grow rice or soy. They kill things. And they eat the brain, the lungs, and the pancreas, and the liver, and the skin. And they dig in the dirt for roots and tubers. They gather berries and scavenge birds' eggs and shellfish if they're coastal. So that's the diet that is programmed into our genetic code. I often say something like, well, if you saw a lion gore a wildebeest and eat its brain and heart, and you say, that's disgusting, we're going to cage that lion and feed it kale and broccoli. What's going to happen to the lion? The lion dies.
Well, but the lion would eat the stomach with the fermented,
true, yes,
wouldn't it? Like the lion most likely would eat the fermented content of the stomach of that animal it just killed.
Yes, that's right. And,
right?
The intestines. That's right.
Yeah, and the intestines. So the lion's getting the whole nose to tail experience big time.
Absolutely. Nature's probiotic and prebiotic. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my point, though, is that every creature has a lifestyle, a diet programmed into its genetic code.
Right.
So if you fed a frog or turtle corn, it's probably not going to survive. If you feed a lion kale and broccoli, it's not going to survive. Well, we're no different. We have a style of eating programmed into our genetic code. And the addition of wheat and grains was a very recent addition. And by the way, what happened to those first humans in the Middle East who first consumed the ancestral form of wheat, einkorn wheat, or sub-Saharan Africa, first consuming millet, or Central America about 8,000 years ago, 4 to 8,000, consumed maize or teosinte, the forerunner of corn? What happened to those populations? Well, so interesting, Natalie. Prior to the consumption of wheat and grains, tooth decay was almost unknown. There was almost no cavities, abscess, tooth loss, misalignment. Yet there was no fluoridated toothpaste. There was no dental floss. There was no dentist, no periodontists or orthodontists. Yet there was almost no tooth decay. 1 to 3% of all teeth recovered prior to consumption of grains showed those illnesses. With the addition of wheat and grains in the human diet, 16 to 49% of all teeth recovered showed cavity, abscess formation, misalignment, etc.
Wow.
Now, we, of course, in the modern world, compensate with all these efforts at dental hygiene, fluoridated toothpaste, dental floss, visit to the dentist, cleaning, and yet, as you know, at least 25% of all Canadians, for instance, have lost all their teeth. So it's because we've adopted a very unnatural style of eating by eating this thing that never belonged in the human diet in the first place. So wheat, grains, and sugars. One thing that is really helpful is the inclusion of fermented foods.
Yeah.
So fermented veggies, fermented pickles, sauerkraut, fermented sauerkraut, kimchi, kefirs. The interesting thing about fermented foods is that they provide species of bacteria like Leuconostoc mesenteroides or Pediococcus pentasaceus or Weisella species. These are typically microbes that don't take up residence in the human GI tract. What good are they if they don't take up residence? Well, incredibly, and this is the work of the Sonnenbergs from Stanford, Erica and Justin, the husband-wife team, they did a very elegant study that showed that consumption of fermented foods, frequent consumption, while those microbes don't take up residence, they somehow cultivate the proliferation of very beneficial species. And I'm sorry about these names, Natalie. I don't make up these names.
No, I think I'm impressed at I'm just how they just roll off your tongue. I just think it's amazing. You keep going.
So the microbial species cultivate beneficial species: Fecalibacterium presnitzii, Akkermansia mucinophila, Lactobacillus plantarum, others, that in turn produce butyric acid, a fatty acid that has spectacular beneficial effects, like reduction of insulin resistance and blood glucose, reduction of blood pressure, deeper sleep, vivid childlike dreams, healing of the gastrointestinal tract, acidification of the skin. That's another really cool thing, Natalie, because I get involved in skin issues because I formulate a product for skin. And that is acidification of so normal healthy skin is very acidic, pH of about 4.5. Unhealthy skin in someone with acne, rosacea, psoriasis, eczema, seborrhea is much less acidic, tenfold less acidic, pH about 5.5. The logarithmic scale the pH scale is logarithmic. So
like earthquakes.
Between 4.5 and 5.5 is tenfold.
Yeah.
Well, what's the benefit of acidic skin? Well, it discourages the development of those skin rashes, and it suppresses pathogens like Staphylococcus aureus and causes proliferation of beneficial microbes like Staphylococcus epidermidis. So huge effect. And by the way, it also acidifies the vagina because the skin and the vagina are closely related. That Lactobacillus crispatus we talked about, that's the dominant microbe, or meant to be the dominant microbe in a healthy vaginal microbiome, is also meant to be a major inhabitant of the skin. So the skin is a reflection of the vaginal microbiome. Well, guess what? Many modern ladies have lost it, and they almost always lose it as they age. So restoration of crispatus has potential for both vaginal and, of all things, skin benefits, youthful skin benefits.
Crispatus. We want crispatus. Okay, so we've gotten rid of wheat, sugar, and grains. We're adding in fermented foods.
Oh, okay. Back to the
list. I want a list. I need that list.
Natalie, I liken the gastrointestinal microbiome to a backyard garden.
Yes.
Right? So let's say it's May, where you and I live. The gardening season doesn't start until like May, right?
Yeah. On a good day. Yes. I've seen snow in May. I'm sure you have too.
Oh, yeah. Well, how do we do that? Well, you prepare a plot. Let's say it's a 10 by 10 plot, right? You're going to pick out the weeds and the sticks and the stones. You're going to plant seeds, and then you're going to water and fertilize. And that's how you have tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchini. The gastrointestinal microbiome is very similar. We're going to prepare the garden by doing such things as filtering your drinking water, avoiding preservatives and emulsifying agents in food, buying organic whenever possible, avoiding drugs like the PPIs and the stomach acid blocking drugs, avoiding anti-inflammatory drugs. So we prepare the soil. That, by the way, is a list in my book, Super Gut Book, and in my blog, WilliamDavisMD.com blog. All the things you do to clean up your life. It's pretty straightforward. And it's really a lot of things a lot of people like your listeners are already doing. They're probably trying to buy organic. They're probably already filtering their water. They're trying to avoid prescriptions like antibiotics and anti-inflammatory drugs. Then you plant seeds. The most important seeds are those fermented foods, as well as those yogurts or other fermented foods like reuteri, gaceri, Bacillus subtilis. And then we water and fertilize it. And those are the nutrients that microbes need, mostly fibers, like fructooligosaccharides and inulin fibers from onions, garlic, leeks, root vegetables, legumes, galacto-oligosaccharides from legumes, and then also the polyphenols and carotenoids that accompany whole foods. So it's really just a return to whole foods. One of the most important fibers, surprisingly, is hyaluronic acid that most people don't get because we've been told cut your saturated fat and cholesterol. It caused everybody to abandon consumption of organ meats like brain and skin and tongue rich in hyaluronic acid and collagen, by the way.
Yeah.
But hyaluronic acid, so ladies they always say, oh, don't tell me about hyaluronic acid. I know all about it because I use a serum. I pay a lot of money for a serum to get rid of my crow's feet. And it does work. But I asked them, oh, what did that do for the skin in your neck or abdomen or thigh? Nothing, of course. The real power of hyaluronic acid is consumed orally, where, yes, it increases dermal collagen and you do reduce wrinkles, but it's also a fiber. It's one of the very few fibers sourced from animals. And this fiber is unique in that it's a huge bloom. It causes a bloom of those butyric acid producing species. The Faecalibacterium, the Akkermansia, Ruminicaceae, Lactobacillus, all those wonderful beneficial microbes. So hyaluronic acid, abandoned because of ridiculous dietary guidelines, caused people to be deficient in this essential fiber, hyaluronic acid, and collagen. Collagen also so important.
That can you also get that from bones, like from making bone broth, or the stewed meats, like I made a beef stew the other day, and one of my beefs with beef stew, pardon the pun, is that the meat they give you for beef stew is totally dry and devoid of anything. But what I did is I had bones, like joint bones, and I threw them in with the stew and I just kind of cooked it for, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 hours, like really slow, low cook. And so I ended up getting that gelatinous kind of, and essentially got a bone broth with my beef stew, and it became much more rich. Is that, or do you have to be eating the brains? And because at this point it's even hard to find that stuff, right? But you can get bones if you have a good relationship with your butcher, which I encourage everybody to do, or find an online source. They're around too. So can bones and connective tissue kind of give you that if you cook it down, or is it a different type of hyaluronic acid completely?
So the bones do provide collagen and other minerals. And the softer tissues, tendons, ligaments, fat, marbling, etc., do provide hyaluronic acid. The problem is if you use some of the methods of making bone broth, that is prolonged boiling with the addition of vinegar, it now has very high levels of lead. So if you want to use bone broth, or what I like to do is I call it carcass broth. Sounds awful, I know.
Well, whatever. Don't throw away the chicken or the turkey carcass. Throw it in a pot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The entire leftovers, ligaments, tendons, some meat, some whatever organs you have. Boil it for a brief time, like no more than 4 hours. Never add vinegar. While the vinegar does help mobilize minerals, it also mobilizes the lead that's stored in bones, in our bones and animal bones.
Interesting.
Now, the problem with that, of course, is, you and I and your listeners have busy lives, and most don't have the time to make these broths and soups and stews. And so that's the ideal way. And eating tough cuts of meat, slow cooking them, eating organs if you're so inclined. And by the way, there are soft ways to include organs, pate, for instance, sausages made with casing, real casing, getting ground liver and folded into ground beef.
Which is awesome for sure.
But because it's hard to know how much collagen and or hyaluronic acid you're getting. And modern people are so averse to eating things like pancreas or stomach that you can get it as powdered supplements.
Yeah, absolutely. No, for sure. Okay. So we've cut out wheat, grains, and sugar. We are making sure that we're focusing on organic foods whenever we can. We're filtering our water because Lord only knows what's in our water, and we don't want to know anymore at this point. We just want it filtered. We're adding in fermented foods, and that can be all the fermented foods. So from the beet kvass, like every culture seems to have a fermented food. So there's lots of great options out there. We're making our yogurt because we're buying the book. We're going to get some cultures and we're going to start making our own yogurts, and you can make it dairy or coconut or whatever you want, right? We're adding in the fibers, which is eating those foods. And I want to ask you a question about one of the foods you recommend in the book. And then we're getting the polyphenols and the carotenoids from the fruits and vegetables that we're eating. And I like to say vegetables and fruits. So we put fruit seconds, vegetable first. And then we're getting those, if you can, eat the organ meats, get the stews, the bone broths, no more vinegar, just 4 hours. Got that. You talk about raw potatoes. I got to ask ask you about that. Would because you can get powdered potato. Is it potato starch that you can buy, or green banana flour? And I saw in some of your recipes that you're actually taking a green banana, or you're actually recommending raw potato. Can we just talk about that for a couple of minutes? And I know we're way over time, so but you did say you were available till midnight, so I got lots of time here, but. But you were only kidding. So can we just talk about the raw potatoes for a second?
Sure. So, sorry. Basic process. So potatoes, raw, are rich in fiber. They're almost completely fiber and water with virtually no carbohydrates or sugars. When you heat fiber, people often don't think of fibers this way, but you would know as a nutritionist, fibers are polymers of sugars. We just don't have the enzymes to break down those fibers. But when you heat those fibers, they degrade to sugars.
Right.
So that's why when you have mashed potatoes or baked potatoes or French fries, it's almost pure sugar.
Right.
So
but what about the cooked and cooled school of thought to get the resistant starch?
That's so-called retrogradation, the return of sugars into fibers, is such a minor process that, if you have, let's say, 24 grams of sugars in your baked potato, now you have 23.
Oh.
So,
that explains why the cooked and cooled potato still makes my blood sugar spike. Thank you for enlightening us. So the raw potato essentially doesn't have the sugar. Right. Or not as much.
Zero sugar.
Okay.
It's when it's heated, baked, mashed, etc., when it converts to pure sugar. So you can put that to use. You can cube your raw potato and put it in salads, and other uses like that. It's not some people like to eat it like an apple. They do it that way. It's kind of gross, but some people like it that way.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, and then the green banana versus the green banana powder. Can green banana powder stand in for the green banana, or are you kind of big on the green banana?
Well, a whole green banana is likewise rich in those fibers with no sugars. It's when it's ripe, not heated in this case, but ripe, it converts almost pure sugar. So a medium 7-inch banana, for instance, has about 24 grams of sugar in it. So much too much.
Way too much.
Now, when you dehydrate it into powder, you mash it and then dehydrate it, the typical temperature used is 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which is just enough to convert most of the fibers to sugars.
Yeah. So
I'm told, and we did independent testing to see if that was true, and what we got was green banana powder was 50% sugar. So it's less than a ripe banana, but it's still a lot of sugar. Now, I'm told there's one company who somehow modified the process so they get less sugar conversion, but I've not independently tested it.
Okay. All right. Last question for you, and then we're gonna close this off. Raw honey. What's your view on raw honey?
So it's full of sucrose, glucose, fructose, and you're gonna love this, fecal microbes. Bees poop too.
Sure, but raw honey, there's a lot of interesting research around like Manuka honey, for example, having antimicrobials and all kinds of really beneficial compounds in there for people.
So I think just consumption in small quantities because of the sugars. So
nobody's chugging a jar of Manuka honey if it's good quality. Like, let's be clear, this stuff's expensive. Yeah. We're talking a teaspoon a day.
So I point that out about the fecal microbes only because people should not ferment it.
No.
So it's okay to consume a teaspoon or two or something like that. That's perfectly fine.
Okay.
If you ferment it, because people, once they learn about fermentation,
they want to ferment everything.
They want to ferment everything. Exactly. Because you can ferment meat.
Yeah.
Liver. Just about anything. And it increases nutritional value, has other benefits, and gives you all those wonderful microbes. But some things you really shouldn't ferment. Raw milk is one of them, for instance.
Yeah.
Like honey. Because even if there's a little teensy-weensy bit of, let's say, listeria or Staphylococcus aureus in that raw dairy, or let's say some Proteus or E. coli species in the honey, and you ferment it, fermentation is a way to increase microbial counts.
Right.
And that food could actually become very dangerous.
Okay. All right. Well, good point. So we're not fermenting honey. We're not fermenting raw milk. Raw milk has its benefits, but we're not gonna use it for our yogurt.
Exactly.
We're gonna err on the side of safety here. Okay. So how how do we say goodbye? I don't know. There's so many more questions I have to ask you, Dr. Davis. So why don't we leave it at, we'll do a part 2 someday. And in the meantime, I'm going to invite people to check out your book, Super Gut, because it is so well laid out. And everything that you need is in there, you guys. But Dr. Davis, why don't you tell people where they can find you, where they can get your resources, and also where can we find all of these amazing, and I think a lot of that's in the book anyway, but these amazing species that we want to cultivate for ourselves.
Well, thank you, Natalie. So the book, of course, my blog, williamdavismd.com. There's several thousand posts there. I have an interactive website. So just last night, for instance, I had a 2-hour plus conversation with about 100 people. We talk about all these kinds of things: reuteri, gastri, fermented foods, all that kind of stuff. And that's the awfully named, I know, innercircle.drdavis.com. innercircle.drdavisinfinitehealth.com.
It's just a lot of words. There's a lot of misspelling opportunities in there. But anyway, we'll put it in the show notes so people can find it.
There's that. I'm trying to make, so one of the things we have to pay attention to is, and this is terribly tedious, is bacterial strain. So for instance, if you get reuteri, you want a strain that colonizes the small intestine, produces bacteriocins. Mm-hmm. Well, the most popular strain of reuteri is called the 30242. It's the most common one in probiotics. It does not do any of that. Mm. And so, we want to avoid. So what I'm trying to do, and it's very frustrating. People say, I don't understand these strains. I don't remember. It's 6475 and 17938. So what I'm trying to do is try to make them available. And I have screened them. I have vetted these microbes. I'm trying to make them available through oxyceutics.com, OXICEUTICS.com. Right now we have the reuteri as my reuteri. I have a combination formulation for skin called Gut to Glow. That's the one we put through clinical trials and showed ladies loved it because they lost their skin wrinkles.
I'm all in. I'm going in.
And we will be making crispatus and gastri available, and other microbes. So in other words, this is a source of microbes that I have personally screened for the features we need.
Amazing. So that's oxyceutics.com. And so you already have some products there, and that will be increasing as you'll be increasing the number of products as we go.
You know what happens, Natalie, is Mary Jane gets the Gut to Glow. She takes it. She says, oh, wow, it's been 8 weeks or whatever. Yeah, look. And you know what? I'm happier. And I like my husband better. He doesn't annoy me as much anymore. And my sleep is deeper. I'm having vivid childlike dreams. I'm flying. I'm showing up to theater class in my underwear. I'm more muscular. My waist is shrinking. So what happens then is people around, her daughter, her sister, her mom says, what are you doing, Mary Jane? And she says, well, I'm doing this thing. It's taking this thing. They say, share it with us. Well, it's kind of pricey. Mm-hmm. So what this allows her to do is she can make yogurt from the capsule of Gut to Glow or the MyReuteri. She can share the yogurt, and her friend, her sister, can make the yogurt. And if she wants to get the other components like collagen, hyaluronic acid, and I also include the carotenoid astaxanthin, that's a combination that has huge skin effects. Well, they can do that on their own. So it's a cost-saving maneuver also. And what if the woman also has SIBO, which is very common? Mm-hmm. Well, she can take the capsules and make yogurt for the first few weeks to months and stack the odds in favor of having a successful eradication of her SIBO.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I almost feel like that 4-week SIBO program should almost be a starting point for everybody, and then go from there. Dr. Davis, this has been fantastic and fascinating and highly entertaining. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Natalie.
I really appreciate it. And
thank you for all you do.
Well, it's my pleasure and my honor, and I get to talk to people like you. It's a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natalie.